Well, it is not just a privilege for me to be here today, but it is absolutely thrilling. I am just so honored to stand before you. I am surrounded by friends and mentors and those who I admire and learn from. I celebrate with you and bring greetings from my own institution, Drew Theological School, from the Dean, Javier Vieira, from the faculty. We are so proud of you, Rosemary. This is a joyous occasion. I first met President Rosemary Bray McNatt years ago. Alan, was it Alan in the stroller that used to bring the class?
Daniel.
It was Daniel in the stroller. So the baby, a little older than last. I see it. I first met her when she was a seminary student, and I've known her as a friend and colleague during her time in New York City, where she was a very outspoken Unitarian leader and social justice advocate. I've long been an admirer of the combination of her voracious intellectual curiosity, her compelling and publicly accessible writing about social justice, and her just practical bridge-building leadership style. It is awesome to witness this new beginning for her and the members of the Starr King community, together with their partners that are academic and religious with whom she will work. I speak to you today as your sister, as a sister laborer and teacher in the field of theological education, and a Christian, a liberationist activist in church and society. It is not so much the mission of theological education that will be my focus. And it is certainly not the specific educational mission of Starr King, for that is the task of the president, I understand, later on today. But rather, it's the current religious and societal landscape of theological education, which I invite you to mull with me for a few minutes. I'm interested in the kind of moral lexicon that ought to be the impetus for training religious leaders. The moral lexicon demanded by some of the current justice crises, particularly in the United States. The theme that I have identified, you'll see in your programs, fearfulness, fearful and fearless. Fearful and fearless is no doubt problematic for some of you, at least the first half of it. I know that most of you don't agree with me that fear is a good quality for leaders, especially for progressive religious leaders to possess. It's likely, in fact, that you will not be persuaded in this regard, no matter what follows in my remarks. The dissonance of this moment, where you're looking at me askance, think fearful leaders are needed. What? What's she talking about? Where's she coming from? You know, it reminds me of a similar moment recently in the news in the New York City area. Reverend Dr. Donna Scopper will remember this moment. Not so long ago, the mayor of New York City, a white cisgender politician named Bill de Blasio, he received a lot of heated criticism and disdain. He's married to Shirlane McRae, an openly unapologetic bisexual black feminist woman. That's a queer identity that's disputed on all sides, and yes, I speak from experience. The controversy was kicked up because the mayor publicly described his conversation with their son about the need for caution if and when he may be stopped by the police. Did anyone hear about this? I just don't know how much wider publicity this gets beyond New York City, but it was hot, really hot in New York City. So here's this really big, tall white man. Bill de Blasio is 6'5" or something like that, right? Mayor of New York City, that's a fairly powerful position in city government, and so matter-of-factly explaining the fear that he possessed as a parent of a black son. And much of the popular reaction was, on the one hand, anger, just a tremendous anger, particularly by the police union and other police officers and others as well. And there was just incomprehension, a sense of incongruity, fear. Definitely not the repose expected of a maverick New York political leader. And that moment of dissonance, it's sort of like this moment, where I know most of you don't get or won't agree that fear is a good quality for leaders, and don't believe that it should have anything to do with a vision of theological education and the training of them. But it's into this space of likely disagreement between us, this dissonance that I step gingerly but deliberately, as I insist that both some degree of fear as well as fearlessness is necessary for adequately prepared religious leaders. Hey, you know, I like the edgy places. I like lingering in the dissonance between our cultural and political perceptions that we might be experiencing with one another right now on this issue of fearful leaders. It's precisely the fertile ground where co-learning can occur, is it not? Not belittling or hostile dissonance, but dissonance it's not too quickly truncated because of discomfort, but it holds this delicious, risky potential for an expansive encounter. No. In combination with one another, I believe that fear and fearlessness can offer a resource for transformative, compassionate, spiritually fed leadership that can provoke dissent with the hate-mongering, perpetually war-waging, religious and political inequality-maintaining ethos of our current religious and societal landscape. I know, fearfulness in leaders, it's usually understood as wimpy. If you feel it, you should not admit it. And one would not catch, I don't even think, a whiff of any sense of fear in the characters that we are fed as heroes, the fictional characters, right? In Steven Seagal or Bruce Willis or Liam Neeson and Take 500 or whatever, Taken, right? Or Angelina Jolie. You don't imagine fear being part of those heroic figures, nor the real-life iconic religious leaders, ranging from Muslim leader Malcolm X or Catholic Christian missionary Mother Teresa. Yes, I know this. I know also that besides being understood as wimpy and uninspiring, fear is most definitely an effective tool of manipulation by those who seek to harm and abuse both publicly and privately. So many current extremist religious movements all over the world, whether it's Buddhist extremism in Burma and elsewhere, Jewish extremists in settlements in Palestine, Hindu extremists in India, Muslim extremists such as Boko Haram in Nigeria and elsewhere, all in the name of religion, utilize fear as a tactic of repression. Recently in U.S. politics, Christian extremists have launched draconian assaults on immigrants, misogynist legislative campaigns, discriminatory policies aimed at LGBTQ people, but most intensely against the poor immigrant families, poor women dependent on clinics for basic reproductive health care, poor LGBTQ community members, all largely churned up by producing fearfulness in the public. And through that fearfulness, they have produced so much legislation, so much furor. You remember those folks surrounding that bus of immigrant children? I guess some of you from California remember, surrounding it with just hate filled for these children and families fleeing persecution, and Christians creating that sense of fear. And most recently, the religious refusal legislation, with which I know you're already familiar. It stems from the Supreme Court ruling of the Hobby Lobby decision, a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court to impede women's access to contraception, and their decisions and choices that they make themselves in conversation with their physicians. As Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, do you ever read her dissents? Yeah, they're just amazing. I require them all the time of my students. As she said in her dissent, quote, "In a decision of startling breadth, the court holds that commercial enterprises, including corporations, can opt out of any law, saving tax laws, they judge incompatible with their sincerely held religious beliefs," unquote. And so Christian extremists have used fear tactics to build on these laws. As you know, introduced these in Iowa and Indiana and North Carolina and South Carolina. I think Georgia's law is called Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So this sense of using fear to put in place these provisions that allow public and private business owners to cite for religious reasons, for example, a refusal to serve anyone that they perceive to be LGBTQ. And they might, for example, first responders might refuse medical assistance. High school guidance counselors might refuse to help a student. Publicly funded homeless shelters could refuse shelter. Restaurants and businesses could refuse service, etc. So you know that, of course, frightening people, the use of public fear by religious leaders is not what I'm advocating. Just to be clear, I'm certainly not advocating the use of fear to target certain vulnerable groups and diminish their human rights and their political rights. At the very least, though, I'm urging us to recognize the crucible that the notion of fear represents for ethical public leadership right now. And as progressive educators and ministers, that we must have some kind of tool to continue to generate some kind of tool to counter and confront its destructiveness. I'm inviting you to contemplate the leader's own fears, the fears of the vulnerable, combined with fearlessness as a resource. Fears and fearlessness as a resource in the work of resistance to that repression? Would you be willing to consider the idea that fear can be a healthy response? That fear can be a warning. It can signal the reality of the danger of abusers. It can be a helpful signal to us that heightens our senses and our awareness of the need to struggle against abusers and the need to get help. If you are a leader and you don't have superhero on your chest, repression is evil. Can I get a witness, Bishop Flunder? Repression is evil. And fear can signal that you need some help. And it can be an impetus for naming and acknowledging what is wrong in a way that enables survival and offers the potential for life-affirming, spirit-inspired transformation. Here I am drawing from womanist ethicist Emily Towns, where in her work where she differentiates suffering from pain. Yes. I was amazed by the resilience of the people in Ferguson. I mean, before the killing and before the protests, did you? I'm sure many of you did, but when you read through that Justice Department report, the resilience was so evident. It says, quote, just a few sentences I want to share with you. As this is the Justice Department report, March 2015. As the incidents demonstrate, the Ferguson Police Department officers' use of canines to bite people is frequently unreasonable. Officers command dogs to apprehend by biting even when multiple officers are present. Overall, Ferguson Police Department officers' use of canines reflect a culture in which officers choose not to use the skills and tactics that could resolve a situation without injuries and instead deploy tools and methods that are almost guaranteed to produce an injury of some type. And I skip down. In addition, the Ferguson Police Department's use of dog bites not only against African American subjects is evidence of discriminatory policing in violation of the 14th Amendment and other federal laws. Skipping down, some individuals fear that they cannot immediately pay the fines they owe. They will be arrested and sent to jail. Ferguson staff members told us that they believe the high number of missed court appearances is in their court attributable in part to popular belief, and these fears are well-founded. And it goes on. Community members, such as those in Ferguson, they didn't need the Justice Department report. They didn't need CNN or the blogosphere to tell them they had a right to fear the so-called justice system, to fear the routine realities of state abuse of power targeting certain vulnerable communities. If your congregation is made up, includes urban, transgender women of color, you didn't need a Black Lives Matter movement to tell you about the jeopardy, the violence, the assault, and the killing that happen on a weekly basis, how they are targeted, how these members of your community are targeted. Fear can reflect a reality. It can be a healthy response by those who are victimized that tells you you are not crazy if you feel in danger or under threat. I'm teaching about violence against women this semester in a class in New Jersey's only women's prison. I'm trying to teach an understanding of the dynamics of violence and some of the misguided responses. I'm trying to teach ideas about violence, like if you're being terrorized in your intimate relationship through tactics of control and belittling by your intimate partner, and you reach out to a religious leader or a family member only to be told, be patient, wait on God, that suffering is virtuous, and it's a virtuous quality that's part of many of our religious traditions, and many of our martyrs, and for Christians of our God. And you reach out and they say something like, why don't you just leave? Why don't you just get out of that relationship? It's so hard for me to teach. That's the wrong question. Help me figure out how to get this across. That's the wrong question. If you are in that relationship and you know that your life is in danger, especially if you try to leave, and they don't believe you, because they look at your partner and they see a caring man. They see an attentive spouse. They see your partner as a funny woman jokester. They see a beloved pastor, a studious seminary student, or seminary leader, while you see a frightening, dangerous person. And they say to you, you should do something, but you just did. You named a real threat and danger, and you reached out for help. When I teach this in my class in prison, I am afraid. I am afraid that it will be too hard for the women who must return to their cells after my class, who have to do these readings in their cells. I'm afraid that it's too hard for them to contemplate realities of power and control that resonate with their daily prison experience, as well as flashbacks of past experiences in their lives. I mean, okay, let me tell you the truth. Not only am I afraid, but I have been afraid. I've taught violence against women many times, and I have been afraid and refused to teach it in the prison. This is the first time I've done it. I said, I don't know. I don't know if they can handle it. I don't know if it's right to do that to them, to raise all of that up for them. I felt fearful and still feel fearful. And I almost didn't teach it until one of the inside students, we have an inside-outside, right? So I bring in my students. They're both my Drew students, but I bring in one of the inside students straightened me out. I don't know if you've ever taught in prison, and inside folks will straighten you out, right? If you're not getting it, if you're too much in that frozen hesitation point, and said, and what's the alternative? What kind of leadership did you think was good, Dr. West? Perpetuating silence and erasure of their experience? So I say to you today, together with an acknowledgement of fear, I know some of you aren't with me, but I still am going to assert it anyway. In an acknowledgement of fear, there's a need for a simultaneous fearlessness, right? Acknowledgement of fear, but also a fearlessness to uncover the erasures and the silences and the things pushed into the hidden corners. As Rosemary Bray McNatt said in her memoir, a drive to learn to be unafraid of the dark, that allows us to see and know and live amid pockets of resistance, unquote. Might it be possible to fearlessly acknowledge fear without being frozen in it, but benefiting from the heightened awareness it brings, an awareness of our own use of power in exercising leadership in ministry and with others. A moral lexicon for leaders should consist of a minted, vetted, honed combination of fear and fearlessness. And they might combine in so many ways, and I am almost concluding, but just a couple more ways that they might combine. To have fears about the consequences of inaction in the face of the devastating effects of climate change. But to recognize they necessitate us to act fearlessly, to change human care for the earth and its creatures. To be aware of and hold the fear of the stifling lie in our institutions that there's love and kindness in our post-racism, liberal, progressive networks. And then fearlessly confront white supremacist-sponsored competition for dominance that resides in our minds. You hear me? I said our minds. White supremacist kind of competition for dominance that resides in our minds, confronting it and in the habits of our institutions. Might we fear the possibility of conflict if we initiated a conversation among allies? Maybe you've already done this, about how brown lives of Latino and Latina immigrants thrown into ICE detention centers, or the Muslim Guantanamo Bay detainees undergoing torture every day. Those lives matter as much as Black lives. Have you gotten in a room and had that conversation together? Maybe there's a fearfulness about the inevitable conflict, but it's only that kind of conversation taken on fearlessly will provide us with the intercultural ethic that we need. Might we educate with fearless abandon in the expansion of our imaginations, the depth of our openness to the presence of the holy, the ferocity of our advocacy for equality, honest about our own fears, informed by the perspective of those who live with fear, who live in fear of abusers and systemic oppression, attending to the enriching dissonances. Let us do as the Haitian novelist Edwidge Dandakat says, create dangerously for those who read dangerously. Maybe write, teach, lead, and minister dangerously for those whose identities and lives risk danger. Thank you.